Greetings, everyone. My name is Keith Buffington. I have the great pleasure of welcoming you to the first annual CLTE, Coalition for Life Transformative Education Conference. We're very, very pleased that you've chosen to join us. We think you'll have an exciting time, a chance to meet a variety of people, a chance to hear from a variety of people. We really are focusing this conference on a number of different aspects of what the coalition is all about. And there's quite a range of people who are here as part of the meeting, part of the conference. We know that some people have been involved with the coalition for quite a while. We know that others are really just finding out about what the coalition is. And there are others, of course, who are hoping, I think, and we're hoping, that you'd like to become more involved and become part of the coalition and part of what we're trying to achieve. So the goals for today are to focus on awareness, making you all aware of what we're doing here. And probably even more important than just plain awareness is the sense of community building. As you were noticing, as you were joining the meeting, there's lots of conversations, greetings amongst the people who are already here. We are a community, some of whom know each other fairly well, some of whom we're just getting to know, but we certainly want to get to know all of you. We're trying very hard to make this virtual experience as close to an experience that you might have if we were actually in an in-person conference. We have a couple of breakout sessions. If you've looked at the agenda, and I encourage you strongly to do that, you'll see that there's a number of activities which are not just about presentations and feedback and comments, but they're in fact about you, the audience, and engaging you as in the community, building this community around the Coalition for Life Transformative Education. We're going to tell you a little bit about what's happening now within the coalition. Rick Miller, for example, is coming up very shortly to tell you a little bit about the history of the coalition, how we came to be, what's some of the basis for why we even exist, what we hope to achieve. Some of you, I'm sure, have questions about that. So, and we have a number of people who are directly involved in the coalition who will be talking about their work. The coalition is about transforming the lives of students over their lifetime, not just while they are students as an undergraduate and beyond, but really throughout their entire life. We're trying to focus on those aspects of their life, identity, agency, purpose, that build long-term well-being. So we have projects going on at a range of different institutions, and we are a range of different institutions that are trying to achieve that in the most appropriate way for their own campuses. So you'll have a chance to hear about that. And as we move into the future of this meeting, we're going to be talking about the future of the coalition and how we as a group can come together to change, to make change, to change the culture of our institutions, to change the culture of higher education. We also have some fabulous keynote speakers. We'll be hearing from one today and one tomorrow. Chance to learn about what they're doing in their institutions and how it fits into what the coalition is doing. My role to start us off is really just to give you a little bit of an introduction and a little bit of background about how the meeting will work. We have obviously this virtual format. We're treating it as a Zoom meeting. So you have, if you're used to Zoom, this should all look pretty familiar. You can chat, and we encourage you to do that, particularly if you have questions. You can certainly do chat messages to everyone. You could do directed chats to other people who are here. We encourage you to do that. You can also raise your hand with the reactions button that's at the bottom of your screen, probably, so that we can see that you have a particular thing to say, or you can just unmute yourself. We have not taken complete control over everyone's ability to interact with the screen and with the presentations. So you can unmute yourself and ask the questions, or raise your hand, or put it into the chat, and we will try to respond. We have a number of things that we want to make you aware of. One of them is that this is being recorded. Hopefully you're all comfortable with that. And the breakout rooms will not be recorded, but all the sessions will be. We want to provide the opportunity for people to come back, maybe listen again, or for people who aren't able to be here for the entire duration of the conference of 2 days, starting today from noon to 5 o'clock, and then tomorrow from noon to 5 o'clock Eastern time as well. So we'll be recording this. We'll be posting them on the CLTE website, on the conference webpage. Again, there's a lot of material there that I encourage you to look at. There's the agenda, of course. There are the titles of all the presentations. Further down on that same page, There are abstracts of those sessions and presentations. There are also one-page descriptions of the projects themselves, which have a lot of detail in them. Some of the schools have provided videos that are kind of teasers to get you excited about what they'll be talking about. I encourage you to look at all of that. And again, after the conference is over, we will be posting recordings of the sessions. Another thing that we're going to do, so I'd like you to think a little bit about this ahead of time, is that we're very interested in your feedback. We're very interested in assessment in general. So we will be sending all the attendees a survey to get feedback on the goals of the coalition, on the sessions themselves, the things that worked well, the things that may not have worked as well, because we really value your feedback. So as you're listening to me and to the people who are coming after me, think about how that's impacting you, how that's affecting you, what you're learning from that process, so that when we send you the survey, you'll have a chance to respond. And again, we have a lot of things to get through. One thing I will mention just for today, we'll get to shortly. I said before, the conference is really about community building, making awareness, sharing our ideas, getting your feedback. So we're going to do some community building, and we're going to try and, after the first plenary keynote speaker, Dean Walton from Wake Forest University, we're going to have a little time to have a little bit of breakout and talk amongst ourselves. We're going to put you in breakout rooms to get you a chance to meet people and to get your impressions, share your impressions of what the conference is and what you're looking for. But we have another thing that we'd like you to think about. So I'm going to share my screen and show you a slide. There we go. Which we have borrowed from Babson College, in particular from Cheryl Kieser. And I'm going to ask Cheryl to say a few words about this. And the idea of this, that we want you, the participants, to gift your ideas to the presenters, to us, so that you're not only a receiver of interesting ideas, but you're in fact taking direct action to respond to the people who are talking to you and gifting them something back. So I have Cheryl Kieser, who we can spotlight now. Cheryl is the executive director of the Lewis Institute and the Babson Social Innovation Lab, and has been a phenomenal supporter of the CLTE. We had a fabulous conversation with her earlier in the summer, got a fabulous range of ideas, including this one about gifting, about what the CLTE can do. And one of the things that I'm going to just mention from what's on her bio on the Babson website is that she has a long-standing reputation as a positive disruptor and lives by the mantra, find a way to say yes. So I'm going to let Cheryl say a little bit about finding a way to say yes and gifting as a participant in this conference. Cheryl.
Thank you very much, and welcome to everyone. I'm just going to take a minute. So at Babson, as you can imagine, we have a predisposition towards action. So we came up with a process that when people came, whether it was somebody pitching an idea or somebody coming with a challenge, we have companies come in all the time, they would present, and then we would, instead of just giving feedback, we came up with the notion of gifting, because gifting is very different energy. When you're trying to build community in a coalition, it's much more than just ideas. You got to move those ideas to action. So we actually ask people when they listen to somebody present, that please share, but give an actionable next step, not something that can be done in the future, but the responsibility as the person who's listening to the presenter, the responsibility is gifting back in the form of, if you hear somebody speak, I will share with you this, I will introduce you to, I read a book that I think would be useful, I have seen this app, anything that's very tangible, because in community building, it is about the actions we're taking together and collectively. So while we care about your feedback on the presentations, gifting is a very different energy. It's your saying that I will do something to advance or further that idea in service to the advancement of the community. Gifts are immediately actionable. As I said, it's not like we could do this and we should do this later. The gift giver has to do it ASAP, and the receiver benefits as immediately. Gifts are acts of generosity and not judgment. Gifts are never you should or why didn't you. So the notion is, and I'll use an example, when I first met with Rick and Keith, the gift I wanted to give them, it wasn't that I wanted to talk to them about what they could do or what Babson could do. I immediately gave them something that they could act on by introducing people to take immediate action with them. So the notion is that with a sense of urgency and a big vision and mission like this coalition, the notion of gifting, the responsibility is on all of us who are going to be receiving tons of information over the next day and a half, and how we might advance this. We don't write it down. I remember the first time I did this, someone said, well, you're putting the gifts on the board. No, because the person who's giving the gift knows who they are, and the person who's receiving it just heard that. So the responsibility is between the person who is giving the gift and the receiver. So it's that simple. It's just a reorientation of how we take in the information and how we respond to the people that are speaking at this incredible conference. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And that's a tremendous message for what the conference is all about. It's about giving. It's about bringing people together. In many ways, that's what the coalition itself is about. It's about engaging people, engaging each other, of course, but engaging our students, mentoring our students, gifting them opportunities that will change their lives. So again, the focus today is really on bringing us together, sharing our ideas, gifting our ideas to others, so that we can come together as a group, make this coalition stronger, build momentum for the goals of the coalition, and move into the future. So to tell you, so as we move into the future, of course, it's good to know where we have been in the past. It's good to hear about the past of the coalition, how it came to be, what are some of its goals, what are some of its founding principles or basis for why it exists. So I've asked Rick Miller to take some time now to talk about the coalition, his involvement with it, and where it's coming from. Rick, if you don't know Rick already, he has been a tremendous person, tremendous source of energy, certainly for me and for the coalition since its beginning. Rick has a tremendous background and history in a wide range of roles. The one that probably is most well known and talked about is his role as employee number 1 at the Franklin W. Olin College of Engineering, founding a new College of Engineering, taking that on, stepping out of his previous role as Dean of Engineering at Iowa, and taking on this incredible entrepreneurial role of founding a new college with new students, with new faculty, with new rules. And certainly he did that incredibly well for 20 years. He stepped down from his role a year and a half ago. I'm tempted to say he's not retired, certainly, because he's probably, and I think he would say this, as busy now as he was as president. He just doesn't have the staff to support him, but he's certainly contributing in very many ways to higher education in a variety of ways. He's on a variety of boards. And of course, for today, he's going to talk about the coalition, his involvement with the coalition, what it means to him, how it came about, and some of the directions for the future. So Rick, please, welcome. Looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Keith. You did a pretty good job of making me sound respectable after this. My wife just says I apparently can't keep a job because I keep moving around. I am thrilled to see all of you like-minded people here today. You are risk takers to spend time with a group that didn't exist until very recently. And I wanted to just provide what I think is the bulk of the people on this call who are newcomers to the coalition, who don't really know much about it except what they've heard from Keith and me on calls. So first of all, it's a very diverse group of people. It's probably the most diverse group of universities that you'll ever be in. It includes major research universities. It includes flagship public research universities, regional public universities, private research universities, liberal arts colleges, technical colleges, and sort of everything in between. And the reason that it's that diverse is that what we're working with, the concerns that we have, are fundamental to all of higher education. They're not limited to any one of those groups. In fact, there's one thing that unites us, and that's a concern about outcomes in higher education. Not just graduation and getting a diploma, but what happens after you leave, and what was the impact that you had at the university that you went to. These are big ideas and big goals. There is no recipe for success in this area that I know about, at least not yet. I mean, we're working on that. But it's a goal that I believe is never been more important, and I personally felt was worthy of the rest of my career. In fact, I stepped away from Olin earlier than my contract would have expected, in part because I wanted to spend the few remaining grains of sand in my hourglass doing something that I thought would matter generations later, even beyond engineering. Now, if you look at the agenda to this meeting, it's a little bit surprising how diverse all of these different topics are. In fact, it may be confusing to you. Why are these things all on the same page? I'm going to try to make some sense of that to you by explaining how we got here and what they might possibly have in common. To do that, we'll have to talk about what is the ultimate purpose of this coalition, how did it form, and where is it going? And to give you a start on that, I put in the chat, pretty near the top, a link to a blog, an editorial really by three of us on the steering committee. It's been posted on the AAC&U blog, Association of American Colleges and Universities. And it, in 1,000 words or less, tries to explain who we are and what we're trying to do. So the animating goal of the coalition is to touch every enrolled student at scale with learning experiences that result in significantly improving their well-being years after graduation. Now, I want to stop there because this is in contrast to the most common explanation of why college is worth it today. We normally explain the value of college in terms of return on investment on the relentlessly increasing tuition that families have to pay. When quoted in the press, the metric we usually hear is that college graduates will earn about $1 million more than those without a degree. Think about that. Apparently, any college in any major at any cost will generate, on average, $1 million more in income over your lifetime. The public actually is increasingly skeptical about this. And as the price has gone up relentlessly in years past, there's good reason for that. I'll return to that later. Instead of talking about the money that students will make, we have a different view. We are thinking that instead we should aim higher, higher than employability and completion rates. We're aiming for life transformative education that results in improving much more than your earning power. A good education changes what you know, but a great education changes who you are. I'm here today because I had a life transformative experience in high school with my math teacher in a very rural part of California where it was 40 miles to the nearest hospital. I had her for all 4 years. She was the only teacher of math in the high school. My brother had her too. He had the same experience. Later on, I had an amazing experience at the University of California, where a large public university, I found a mentor who I changed majors 5 times, but I didn't change advisors. This person, we became friends and for 40 years. He came to my house and played ping pong with my daughters in the basement. Amazing. He cared about me as a person. I suspect many of the people on this call today had a similar life transformative experience in your own education when you were younger. We believe that education is about more than gaining knowledge and skill and obtaining a good job. But obtaining a transformative education today is actually much harder than it was when I was young. So what do we mean by well-being anyway? Because it's a very nebulous topic that a lot of people use. If we're aiming for life transformative education, we need to have a better understanding of what that is. And by the way, what would society look like if we could improve well-being across the board for everyone in this society? These are questions that we were really wrestling with back in 2014. Turns out, in May of 2014, some of you may have seen this, Purdue University worked with the Lumina Foundation and with Gallup and produced the largest survey in history of alumni, college alumni in the country, which they then expanded on since then. It's called the Gallup Purdue Index. you'll hear more about this from a representative of Gallup who will be on our meeting tomorrow. It's now is a remarkable data set that has more than 100,000 college alumni from hundreds of universities, not just Purdue. It set out to measure, and I'm quoting now, the most important outcomes of higher education: great jobs, great lives, and to provide insight into the potential improvements in higher education that would feed directly into those outcomes. It's really so rare that we do that in higher education. I mean, I can tell you, some of you probably had the same experience. I've been asked a number of times to go to a retreat. I went to one in San Francisco for a company because they wanted to talk about the future of work. They had about 10 representatives from lots of different fields. We spent 3 days arguing about what it's going to look like. Why did they do that? They did that because they were concerned about their own strategy to make sure that what they were going to produce was well aligned with what was going to happen in the world. And they were afraid about being too narrow in their focus by only looking within their own domain. You know, when I came back on the plane, I realized that just doesn't happen in most higher education institutions. I've been involved with 5 of them now, and I can't remember ever doing something like that to decide what our curriculum should be going forward, having a retreat and bringing people in from corporations. Now, I'm sure that there are universities that do, but this is an exception rather than the rule. So Gallup has long focused on well-being. Turns out this is not a recent idea. At least 80 years they've been doing this. And together with a company called ShareCare, they use a 5-dimensional model of well-being in a population. It's based on behavioral economics, and it's widely used around the world. And there are a number of competitor metrics that are quite similar. The 5 dimensions include financial well-being, managing your economic life to increase financial security and reduce stress. So this is not completely separate from understanding return on investment and having a job. It's just beyond that. This includes that, but goes beyond. Another of the dimensions is physical well-being. By that, they mean having good health and enough energy to get things done daily. There's community well-being, which they interpret it as liking where you live, feeling safe, and having pride in your community. There's social well-being, which they call having supportive relationships and love in your life. And there is purposeful well-being, which is liking what you do each day and being motivated to achieve your goals. Note that this includes, but it goes well beyond the return on investment argument that we've been talking about before. It does not replace it, it expands on it. This is actually what we would want for all of our children. I really began to get interested in this when I started watching the trajectory of my own kids after graduating from college. You know, they didn't choose the option that provided the maximum income. Should I be disappointed? Is that a failure? They chose the option which in each case resulted in better well-being for them. I think we could do a better job of aligning this. So these are thoughts from some years ago, calling some friends. We got together in our first meeting on June 23rd of 2017 at the O'Hare Airport. About 20 of us in total, representing a dozen institutions. These were mostly leaders of universities, presidents, provosts, and deans. A lot of head nodding went on as we went around the table talking about what we were seeing. We had several guest speakers at this first meeting. The first one was Brandon Bustede, who designed and led the Gallup Purdue study at Gallup. We also had Professor Carol Dweck from Stanford, who's done this work on mindset. And if you haven't seen her book, I think you would find it very interesting. And one of her former students, Professor Mary Murphy at Indiana University, who's extended this work into higher education from K-12. And this is really about measuring the impact of growth mindset. Then we had President John Raymond of the Medical College of Wisconsin, and we found that there's a similar set of concerns and activities going on there. This is about remaking medical education. It's called now the Kern National Network for Character and Caring in Medicine. It has 7 medical schools who are rethinking the whole medical education enterprise. These include, for example, UC San Francisco, Vanderbilt, Dartmouth, University of Wisconsin at Madison, University of Texas at Austin, and of course, Medical College of Wisconsin. That was our first meeting. Well, we found it worthwhile, and so we had some more of these. So what happened next? More airports, more speakers, more head nodding, more universities joining the group. Some of the other speakers that we had, Professor Angela Duckworth from the University of Pennsylvania. She had written a book on grit. We wanted to hear more from her. Now she has a character lab. We had Professor Howard Gardner and Wendy Fishman from Harvard. They had just finished a 7-year study on the future of college, which actually will be published in a book now called The Real World of College next year. Their findings basically showed that belonging and mental health are at the top of the list for undergraduate students today. Then we've also had Bill Burnett and Dave Evans from Stanford. These are the designers of the Designing Your Life course at Stanford University, the largest elective course across the entire campus at Stanford in history, I believe. And more recently, we had President Clayton Spencer from Bates College come and talk to us about the Purposeful Work project that they have there. And you'll hear more about that because it's one of the presentations that you'll hear in this meeting. So we at that point began to have really increased interest from these discussions, but a little bit of concern because none of us in this group are, long-term researchers in the fields that we're talking about, student motivation, education theory. So we commissioned a literature review by Professor Murphy at Indiana University. And the result of that was basically to confirm that the themes that we were hearing were really quite well aligned with the research that exists today in the published work. So we decided to keep meeting, of course. However, we decided, okay, there's something here, something needs to be done. But a number of us have been around long enough that we have been to Washington on committees. We work for 3 years to develop a consensus report, and we write a book, and it goes on somebody's shelf. And some of us are old enough to have done that more than once, and the book that we wrote that nobody read is still on the shelf that we're beginning to now redo the second time. I'm also an engineer with, as you know, a sort of restless streak, and decided that Buckminster Fuller was probably right when he said, when change is needed, don't bother explaining why it's needed, just build a prototype that makes everything else obsolete. If you think of this as urgent as I do, it's like the house of higher education is on fire. And the right answer is not to form a commission and do a study for a year. The answer is to do something. So we began to do something. In about January of 2020, what we decided to do is to build prototypes on many different campuses that are driven by faculty to experiment with different ways to improve well-being for every student long after graduation. No one knows how to do this. The Wright brothers didn't know how to fly either when they first started jumping off of the cliff, but they had these wings on their back and they kept saying there must be a better way. That's kind of where we're at. So we started this mini grants program in January of 2020. Yes, just before COVID. Of course, we didn't know that when we started it. And we had launched this mini grant program. These are very small grants in the round-off era in a lot of institutions, to 10 institutions supporting 11 faculty-based teams, each aimed at enhancing well-being long after graduation, with a somewhat imprecise, deliberately imprecise definition of what we mean, left up to the faculty to interpret it in the context of their own institution. Now, today's conference provides you the first glimpse of how these initial experiments were conceived and how they were implemented. COVID interrupted all these efforts, of course. So the result was some projects made it to the finish line and others are still in the early stages of implementation. So it's a spectrum of maturity. So what you will see here is a range of results from finished data reports to plans for launch this fall. Now you'll also hear 3 words recur a lot in each of the presentations. And these words are identity, agency, and purpose. And you might naturally have a question, why these 3 words? Where did this come from? Simply put, this is our best interpretation of the major insights from the Gallup study as of today. As you will hear tomorrow from Stephanie Markin of Gallup, their original survey revealed 2 major factors which were highly correlated with well-being long after graduation, meaning it at least doubled the well-being relative to the population in general. The first of those was the concept that someone cared about me as a person. and certain forms of experiential learning too, which we broadly interpreted as related to identity, someone caring about me as a person. There's belonging in here, there's a sense of identity in there. And the experiential learning that engages you so that college is not just about books, but it's about life as well, is a form of agency. You can do something. Later, when Bates College experimented with the purposeful work program, they found even stronger evidence that purpose contributes to well-being as well. So we now have three. So identity, agency, and purpose are our first attempt to capture important dimensions of the answer to the right kinds of college experiences. But of course, we're certain to discover more and better factors in the future. Some might come out of the presentations that we have here in the next 2 days, and we will share results with each other. So this framing certainly will evolve as we gain experience. No sense do we think we have it right at this point in time. Now, aside from producing happier graduates, does well-being provide tangible benefits to society or to employers, for example? Natural question to ask. Why is this so important? In a word, yes. In fact, it does. For example, a Professor Tyler Vanderweel from the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, an epidemiologist, has found evidence that people with high levels of well-being, by this kind of definition, are not only happier, but they also have healthier and more engaged lives at work. For example, they make less use of their health insurance. They have lower rates of absenteeism at work, and they are more resilient in difficult times. There doesn't seem to be a downside to developing positive well-being anywhere. So Gallup's well-being index is also used to monitor well-being globally, not just in higher ed. In fact, the Purdue study, I think, was an unusual application of the Gallup study, focused only on higher ed. So in particular, you'll find recently that Costa Rica was identified as one of the happiest countries on earth. I'm just taking this as an example, using surveys and a well-being index like Gallup's. In a very recent article in the New Yorker, Dr. Atul Gawande, whom you might know because of his work in medicine, wrote an article to say that the average lifespan in Costa Rica is now several years higher than it is in the United States. Now, this has not always been the case. Some years ago, theirs was far behind what we are doing in the US. Their commitment to community and to public health, even in a nation with modest resources, has been successful in transforming their society and improving lives more effectively than emphasizing self-reliance or pursuit on independent wealth in an entrepreneurial environment. Quite interesting outcomes, according to Atul Gawande. So well-being is not something we're inventing. Well-being is not just about higher ed. Well-being has been around for 80 years. Well-being is a broader index than return on investment. It may be something worth looking at as a broadening higher goal for higher ed. Now, let me contrast that for a minute with where the public is on their feelings about higher ed. This might not be on the front page of what faculty members teaching calculus read every day, but it's close to the front page on what presidents read, particularly in public universities today. Several state legislatures today are working to end tenure on their campuses. They're attempting to cancel some curricular initiatives and forbid teaching of certain subjects. They're withholding funds for different programs, like arts and humanities subjects rather than STEM subjects, out of a belief that the purpose of a university is to produce jobs. Quite an interesting high-profile outcome. It's not just that. A few years ago, the Pew Charitable Trust found that the majority of Americans feel that higher education is headed in the wrong direction. This is new. Although there's disagreement about what that means, none of them happy with what's happening in higher ed. And that a majority of Republicans feel that higher education is actually bad for the country. If you're from one of those areas of the country, I don't think I have to persuade you what this is about. A few years ago, Inside Higher Education reported that while 96% of provosts report that they're doing a very good job of preparing graduates for the workforce, Only 14% of the public and 11% of business leaders strongly agree with that statement. We're not listening to each other, and it isn't working well. More recently, a study released last week by AAC&U showed that only 60% of Americans think that a college education is worth the cost today. And that actually bifurcates into two groups: the group of people who have a family where college education is normal, and the group of people where it's not. For the families that are not familiar with higher education, by the way, only about 1/3 of Americans have a bachelor's degree. It's about 50-50 whether they think a college education is even a desirable goal. It's about 70% of those with a college education would agree that we should send our kids to college. We have a lot of work to do, folks. This does not make sense to me if you grew up on a college campus as I did. So when a college education has never been more important, look at the challenges we're facing today with cybersecurity, with climate change, with viruses that could end life on the planet. How do you expect our species to go forward without higher education? And in America, which seems to be an outlier, other countries don't seem to have this ambivalence about the role of higher ed. We have work to do. But changing the goals to long-term well-being could help us focus on what really matters, and also possibly earn back public trust, because their lens of what happens on the campus is not whether you won the Nobel Prize. It's how my son or daughter reacted and was shaped by the education that they received at your university. I believe this is not a nice to have initiative. It's becoming a must have. We need to do something. The goal of the coalition is to create a community of practice that provides a safe space to share what didn't work as well as that did, and to develop a community dedicated to enhancing educational outcomes for all students in America. All students in America. We hear a lot about diversity and inclusion today. You can't get there by only focusing on the few lucky ones who discovered the things that work. We have an obligation to bring this to every student. Now, we're trying to change the conversation about what a good college education means and to start a movement. If we succeed, in 20 years, faculty and staff all across America will have found ways to incorporate the best practices developed here and elsewhere, and thereby measurably improve the well-being of all college graduates, and therefore the satisfaction of their parents and of society with what happens in college education, touching everyone at scale. Big dream. They won't remember how this started. For them, it will seem that it's always been this way. This is our goal. We hope you'll join us on this journey. It's an initiative worthy of our best efforts. It's by no means certain that this is going to succeed. But if you're going to spend your career doing something worthy of your time and energy, I think this should be on the radar as one of those options to think about. We owe our children and our grandchildren these best efforts to make a better world. So anyway, thank you all for your interest in this program and for your willingness to spend some hours with us today and tomorrow. I am delighted to have you here on our call.